So let's talk about a very important topic called karma. So in this discussion, I am talking about just part 1 of this very important topic called karma. So the first topic is karma, the eternal enigma. Let's talk about its sutra. Karma is about becoming the source of one's own creation. In shifting responsibility from heaven to oneself, one becomes the very maker of one's destiny. Let's discuss its first point called in the driver's seat. It happened. Once the Pope went up to the United States, his schedule was a busy one with engagements in various cities. One day he happened to be in Louisiana in a chauffeur-driven stretch limo, the vehicle that demonstrated the quintessentially American ability to stretch a limousine to its limit. The Pope was excited because he had never driven a car like this. He told the chauffeur, "I would like to drive." How could the chauffeur refuse the Pope? He said, "Of course, Holy Father." So the Pope took the wheel and the chauffeur took the back seat. The Pope started enjoying the car and his foot got heavy on the gas pedal. He hit 90 and then 100 miles an hour. He did not realize how fast he was going. Now the Louisiana police, known to be sticklers when it comes to speed breaking, swung into action. When the Pope in the zooming limo saw the flashing light behind him, he pulled over to the shoulder of the road. The cop got out and carefully, with his hand on his gun, slowly approached the car. He looked in. He saw it was the Pope himself driving. He peered into the back seat and saw somebody else sitting there. "Wait," he said. He went back to his car, took out the radio and called the police chief. He said, "Captain, I have got a real big fish." "Oh, come on, who it is? Bonnie and Clyde?" "No, somebody much bigger than that." "Sweet Jesus, have you got A.I. Capone?" "Oh no, somebody much bigger." "What do you think you have got? The President of United States of America himself?" "No, somebody far bigger than that." "Come on, who the hell can be bigger than the President of the United States? What have you got on your hand?" The cop replied, "I don't know, but he's got the Pope as his chauffeur." And that's bring us to the crux of the matter. Most people do not have a clue who is driving their car. Look around you. Ask yourself how many people you know are living with any real understanding of the crazy locomotive called life. Most people are passive pawns in the ride, clueless about how the machinery works, the source of its octane, how to manage its direction or its velocity, or above all, who their chauffeur is. They walk of free will, liberty and independence, but they have little or no control over their lives. Their destiny is something they create unconsciously. Welcome to karma, a dimension that puts you squarely back where you belong, where you were meant to belong all along, in the driver's seat. Let's talk about its second point, demystifying karma. With that, we come to the central question of this book: what is karma? Literally, the word means action. Unfortunately, most people have understood action in terms of good and bad deeds. They see karma as a balance sheet of merits and demerits, virtue and sin, a life audit of sorts. To others, it is a ledger maintained by some divine character accountant who assigns some people to celestial bliss and consigns others to a nether world or into the maw of some recycling machine that spew them back into the world to suffer some more. This is not merely false and absurd, it is tragic. This notion has created generation of puzzled and fearful human beings who use the term indiscriminately without a clue of what it means. It has spawned a brand of fatalism that has paralyzed vast segment of people and has been used to validate social injustice and political tyranny of various kinds. It has also led to much spurious philosophizing and empty academic debate, and has of course boosted the fortune telling industry. Let us shatter the first myth. In actual fact, karma has nothing to do with reward and punishment. It has nothing to do with some despotic life auditor up in the sky working with primitive device of carrot and stick. It has nothing to do with a benign God up in the heaven, nothing to do with divine retribution, nothing to do with virtue and sin, good and evil, God and Mr. Lucifer. Karma simply means we have created the blueprint for our lives. It means we are the maker of our own fate. When we say this is my karma, we are actually saying I am responsible for my life. Karma is about becoming the source of one's own creation. In shifting responsibility from heaven to oneself, one becomes the very maker of one's destiny. Karma is the natural basis of all existence. It is not a law that is imposed from above. It does not allow us to outsource our responsibility anywhere else. It does not allow us to blame our parents, our teacher, our country, our politician, our gods, our fates. It makes each one of us squarely responsible for our own destinies and above all the nature of our experience of life. So the only relevant question here is, are you ready for karma? Are you ready to hear about a dimension that is so empowering that it tells you that you are fully capable of taking the reins of your life into your own hands? If not, read no further. If you are willing and if you are curious to find out more about how this mechanism works, this book could be your key. All you need to do after this is to fire up your engine and set off on your new life journey. Once you are at the wheel, your experience of the ride will never be the same again. It is important to remember one thing. However, karma is not a doctrine. You do not get any brownie point for subscribing to it. You do not get any negative mark for disbelieving it. Karma is not a creed, a scripture, a ideology, a philosophy or a theory. It is simply the way things are. It is an existential mechanism. Like the sun, it operates whether you acknowledge it or not, whether you pay obeisance to it or ignore it. It is not looking for a fan club. It simply turns you from a white-knuckled, terror-struck passenger in the backseat into a confident driver in charge of the wheel, joyfully navigating the course of your own destiny. Namaskaram. So let's start with the karmic cycle. To turn driver instead of passenger, however, you need to start by knowing a few basic rules about how the karmic mechanism works. So let us start by addressing a fundamental misunderstanding. Although karma means action, it doesn't necessarily refer to physical deeds. It doesn't necessarily refer to what you do in the outside world, whether it be acts of charity or acts of villainy. Instead, karma is action on three levels: body, mind and energy. Whatever you do on these three levels leave a certain residue or imprint upon you. So what does this mean? It is quite simple. Your five senses are collecting data from the outside world every moment of your life. You are literally being bombarded with stimuli at every instant. Over time, this enormous volume of sense impressions begins to assume a certain distinction pattern within you. This pattern slowly shapes itself into behavioral tendencies. A cluster of tendencies hardens over time into what you call your personality or what you claim to be your true nature. It works in the reverse as well. Your mind shapes the way you experience the world around you. This becomes your karma, an orientation to life that you have created for yourself in the relative unawareness. You are not aware of how these tendencies develop, but what you consider to be myself is just an accumulation of habits, predisposition and tendencies you have acquired over time without being conscious of the process. Take a simple example. Some people may have been joyful children but are now unhappy adults. There may have been life events that triggered that unhappiness, but in most cases people have no clue how and when they acquire this persona. If they have created their personality consciously, they would have crafted themselves quite differently, but somewhere along the way, by following the dictates of their unexamined reactions and tendencies, chronic unhappiness becomes their defining characteristic. In other words, karma is like old software that you have written for yourself unconsciously, and of course you are updating it on a daily basis. Depending on the type of physical, mental, energetic action you perform, you write your software. Once the software is written, your whole system functions accordingly. Based on the information from the past, certain memory patterns keep recurring. Now your life turns habitual, receptive and cyclical. Over time, you have become ensnared by your pattern. Like so many people, you probably do not know why certain situations keep recurring in your inner and outer life. This is because these patterns are unconscious. As time goes on, you turn into a puppet of your accumulated past. The life of many people, for instance, are dominated by food and substance abuse. Chemical addiction certainly play a role here, but the primary problem is that they have set up a recurrent pattern in their life. However hard they try to emerge from it, they kept falling back into the trap. If one does not consciously rewrite one's karmic software, the regularity of the pattern can feel like it is being imposed from without rather than initiated from within. But this software is not a fate to be endured. It can be rewritten, dropped, or distanced, as we will see later in this discussion. The karmic mechanism is ceaseless. Every mental function in you creates a chemical reaction, which then proceeds to provoke a physical sensation. This sensation in turn reinforces the chemical reaction, which then strengthens the mental functions. Over time, your every chemistry is determined by a series of unconscious reactions to sensory and mental stimuli. So now, if you simply think about something that excites you, you can actually feel certain sensation in your body. This can be empirically verified. We now know that the human being is a psychosomatic organism, that whatever happens in the mind immediately imprints itself on the body as a chemical process. If you think of mountain, for instance, your chemistry will react in one way. If you think of tigers, it reacts in another. So for every minute mental fluctuation, there is a certain type of chemical reaction and sensation. You may not even be aware of it unless the sensation becomes acute. All these sensations register and over the time become the blueprint of your unconscious mind. You are therefore a living repository of karmic memory on levels you are not aware of. Today, research has shown that the psychological and emotional trauma can contribute to your risk for mental and physical health problem. We are told that mental distress can lead to cardiac problem. None of this is new. People always knew that if you go through psychological upheavals, your heart will break. All this happens because your body chemistry change over a period of time as a result of constant mental and emotional fluctuation. So this is a vicious cycle. If you touch the firmament of your mind just once, the resulting ripples are enough to keep going for lifetimes. The mind is a process that picks up momentum without any assistance from you. You may have noticed that when you were 18, you were generally able to shrug off difficulties and move on. The ability was more challenged by 30. By 45, many things seem to bother you, and by 60, you find it almost impossible to pick yourself up, adopt, and move on. This mentality is pervasive. You can see it all around you. At 18, people are often anxious about their future. At 70, when most of their life is behind them, they are still worried. They have become such veterans at the business that they worry for no reason at all. This is because of the cycle from mental fluctuation to chemical reaction to sensation, which then in turn produce a chemical reaction that leads again to a mental fluctuation. It has gathered momentum. So over time, this has cumulative impact on cellular and genetic memory as well on the energy system. So the unconscious mind is therefore a tremendous library of karmic memory. You would find this information very useful if you were approaching it consciously. The problem is that it manifests at all the time without your permission. You feel like one big mess because you are punching your psychological keyboard randomly all the time. This is a CD on which music is recorded. The disc is like your body, whether physical, mental, or energetic. The music is analogous to the impression recorded upon your body. Now the music is just a small impression on a compact disc. But when you play the CD, you do not experience the disc, you experience the music. Karma is similar. You are not actively experiencing the energetic or mental or physical body. You are only facing the music. And you cannot stop it. You are experiencing your karmic impression and imprints all the time, and you cannot bring this to a halt. So let's talk about the tedium and tyranny of karma. The level at which the compulsiveness of karma operates may surprise you. When you walk into an auditorium or conference room, the seat you choose may seem like a decision you made freely, but often a level of karmic compulsion is involved. If you attend the same conference or class for the next 5 days, you may notice that you are likely to sit in the same place each day. Many years ago, when I was training teachers to impart my inner engineering program in different places, the new trainee teachers would often ask Sadhguru, what kind of questions are students likely to ask? What can we expect and how do we deal with it? So I made a chart for them of the arrangement of the class and told them, see, if a person comes and settle down here, this is the kind of question they are going to ask. If a participant settles down there, that is what they are going to ask. Now of course there were expectations, there were exceptions. A latecomer might choose a place based only on the seat that is available, but 90% of the time it happened exactly the way I said it would. That is how predictable karma is. So karma is not some external system of crime and punishment. It is an internal cycle generated by you. These patterns are not oppressive you from without, but from within. Externally, it may be a new day. You may have a new job, a new home, a new life partner, a new baby. You may even be in a new country, but internally you are experiencing the same cycle, the same internal oscillation, the same behavioral shift, the same mental reaction, the same psychological tendencies. Everything has changed except for your experience. You can keep modifying the outer environment, but nothing will work because you haven't figured out how to change your karma. Something else seems to be pushing your buttons. Someone else seems to be driving your car. For every other creature on this planet, the struggle are essentially physical. If they eat well, they are just fine. But human beings are different. For humans, when the stomach is empty, there is only one problem. But when the stomach is full, there are 100 problems. You may talk freedom, but you are gold plating your limitation all the time in absolute unawareness. Even as you extol the values of independence, everything about you, not just the way you look or feel or think, but even the way you sit or stand or walk, is determined by your past patterns. Do not forget that in addition to being unconscious and compulsive, karma is also deeply cyclical. The karmic information within your system is encoded in different kinds of cycle. The largest cycle is the solar cycle, because everything animate and inanimate in this solar cycle is deeply influenced by the sun. Our planet is no exception. The solar cycle is a period of 4,356 days or nearly 12 years. Someone who lives according to the solar cycle leads a life of great health, well-being, alignment and minimal friction. As the length of a karmic cycle decreases, life becomes progressively more unbalanced. If your life runs in a 3 or 6 month cycle, you are in a serious state of psychological imbalance. The same inner upwells or life situation will keep recurring every few months. If your life is determined by a 28-day cycle, the lunar cycle, which is also shortest one, you could well be considered deranged or psychotic. The word Luni, as you know, is linked to the word lunar, and this is no coincidence. It should be remembered, however, that the karmic cycle has nothing to do with the reproductive cycle of the female body. Now, if we do not break these internal and external patterns, nothing new will ever happen. You might have noticed that the more successful you become, the more frustrated you get, because somewhere unconsciously you sense that you are simply going around in circles. You may have learned to ride the cycle, but you are not free from it. So with yogic practices, the aspiration is to move toward the solar cycle, so your balance and stability are assured. You may not be able to change your past action and the mental and emotional karma you accumulated, but you no longer slide into short spin cycles. You no longer wear your karma as a skin tight garment. You learn to wear it loosely. You hold it at a distance. So the problem is that people do not realize just how tenacious karma is. You could meet with an accident and die, but your karma is not destroyed. You could break your heel and blow all your brains out, but the karma continues. That is how resilient, how relentless, how subtle the karmic mechanism is, and that is why freedom from the cycle so often seems like such a remote possibility. The yogic tradition tells us that in addition to the physical body or annamaya kosha, each human being has a mental body called manomaya kosha and the energy body called pranamaya kosha. There are subtler bodies as well, known as the etheric body or called Vijnanamaya kosha, and the bliss body called Anandamaya kosha. But the accumulation of karma especially happen on the level of the first three bodies: physical, mental and energetic. So therefore, even if you break your body and your mind, your life energy continue to bear the karmic imprint like a computer hard disk. The backup system are so efficient that even if you lose your body or mind, you still do not lose your karma. However, it does not matter what volume of karma you have. The moment you start stepping into the subtler dimension of the etheric and bliss body, your karma cannot touch you. The law of cause and effect can operate only on the physical, mental, and energy levels. Beyond that, it has no impact. The moment you begin to taste the divine, as it were, your karma has no hold over you. We will explore this in a great length in part 2 of discussion. So there was a time when human beings wrote on stone tablets. From stone tablet we moved to leaves, and then we came to books. From books we moved to cassettes and CDs. We have now come to the age of microchip. What could be stored on a million stone tablet is encrypted in the tiniest speck imaginable. It won't be long before technology finds a way to start recording information on pure energy itself. This may not yet have manifested in modern technology, but eventually it will happen. I say this not out of my technological knowledge, but because I know how the inner mechanism works, and the atomic and the cosmic, the individual and the universal mirror each other on every level. Right now, the same electricity that power your light bulb become light, the same electricity that powers your air conditioner makes the air cool. The same electricity that powers a microphone becomes amplified sound. That is not because the electricity is intelligent, it is simply the mechanism of the appliance. But a day will come when we will have smart electricity. We will be able to load memory onto the energy of electricity directly, so the very electric stream can come with an intent. It will have the information to behave in a specific way and to make certain decisions. Maybe the day is still far away, but I have no doubt we are heading there. When I initiate group of people into a spiritual process, each person's energy behave differently depending upon their karmic information. Though the same process is offered to everybody, each person's energy response depend upon the type of karma they carry. The energy body respond according to the karma of software imprinted upon it. That is why two people response to an initiation is never the same. In short, karma operate on many different planes. You cannot shake it off with physical illness or accident, dementia, psychosis or death. You will notice that even those who are mentally ill do not behave similarly. Their karmic structure may be out of control, but it still governs the way they behave. Unless you loosen the grip of karma, there is no way out. This is the deadly tedium and tyranny of the karmic rut. This is also why people have from time immemorial sought something more, even though they do not know what it is. This condition has been given many names, from existential discontent and ennui to simple anxiety and unease. It is the sense of not living life at full throttle, not understanding its purpose, its beginning or its end, its direction or the source of its propulsion. It is the age-old human resentment of powerlessness, of limitations. So let's talk about fifth point of this discussion, the smell of bondage. As we have seen, whatever you do with your body, mind or energy leaves a certain imprint. These imprints configure themselves into tendencies. These tendencies have been traditionally described in India by a wonderfully apt word, vasana. Literally, vasana means smell. This smell is generated by a vast accumulation of impression caused by your physical, mental, emotional and energy action. Depending upon the type of smell you emit, you attract certain kind of life situation to yourself. So think of a flower. A flower has a certain kind of vasana. It is this fragrance that draws certain kind of life to it. It cannot move and it has no volition, but because of its fragrance, it may be chosen for worship in a temple sanctum. In fact, thanks to its vasana, it gains entry where few human beings are permitted. It is not so different for human being. Here the word smell does not imply an order. There is no value judgment attached to the word. It simply means that if you exude a particular kind of vasana, existence will ensure you land up in a certain place at certain times. If you exude another type of vasana, existence will make sure you land up in certain other places. So what moves towards you and also what moves away from you are determined by the smell that emanates from you. Your Vasana depends, of course, entirely on the kind of residual memory or karmic content you carry. So this works in subtle ways. You may not be aware of it, but in wakefulness and sleep you are performing karma. A simple thought pattern could make you function in a specific way. If you keep thinking about the movies or perhaps a particular movie star, for instance, you are very likely to see a particular person in a crowd who shares your passion. You might miss the others, those who love books or meditation or something else. If you see 1,000 faces before you, your Vasana is likely to draw you towards someone who is similarly inclined. It happened. At a certain point as a teenager, I got myself a huge cobra, a marvelous 12-foot long specimen. It had made its way into a local tube light factory, and I caught it. Much to the relief of the factory workers, I hid it under my bed in a large glass container. Somehow one day it managed to escape. When my father heard a loud hiss from my room, he went down on his knees to find out what the matter was. When he saw the cobra, he absolutely freaked out. He ran out of the room crying, "Cobra, cobra." When I entered the scene, everyone at the home was literally standing on chairs and sofas. On the other hand, I ran into the room to protect my snake, anxious that my companion would be thrown out. My parents' Vasana produced aversions, my Vasana produced attraction. So I managed to smuggle the same snake back and housed it later on the rooftop of my home in a large cage. On another occasion, it managed to escape again. I happened to be out at the time. As I came riding back on my bicycle, I saw my parents standing outside the house, constant, constant consternation writing large upon their faces. The school adjacent to the house had just let up at 4 in the afternoon. A huge crowd had gathered around the snake. Everyone was terrified. As I drew close, I realized what was going on. I knew I could not go home. There would be too much drama. I simply zoomed by, scooped up my cobra by the middle with one hand, and rode away. This story exemplifies Vasana at work. What provoked terror for my parents and others produced a very different response in me. I have never felt any aversion to snakes. My scene of kinship with them is an ancient Vasana that I carry. I have always been comfortable around these exotic creatures. Ever since childhood, I have been able to intuitively track their presence in the wild. If I simply followed my sense of smell, I would know under exactly which rock the snake could be found. I developed quite a reputation in my neighborhood as a snake catcher. So there are many reasons for my attraction to snake. The connection between yogis and snake is an old one. Both exude a Vasana that draw them to each other. The snake is an incredibly perceptive creature and is instinctively drawn to a higher level of energy. This is why Adi Yogi Shiva, the first yogi, is always depicted in traditional iconography with a snake around his throat. In all those cultures in which people have developed into extrasensory perception, the snake play a pivotal role. The traditional venerations of snake, cows and crows in India is based on the awareness that these creatures represent an advanced stage of existential development. Since yogis constantly aspire to enhance their perception, the snake is a particularly important presence in the yogic tradition. The cobra is revered as the only creature that can perceive the subtle etheric dimension, even in the daytime. Not surprisingly, it plays a significant role in several creation myths as well, even if it has sometimes been disparaged by those who feared its capabilities. Yet another reason for this Vasana is the connection between the snake and the Kundalini, the coiled energy that lies in the base of the human spine, which yoga consciously harness for spiritual development. The Kundalini energy has been described as serpent energy because of its similarity in the snake in terms of shared pattern of movement and stillness. In the early days of my work as a guru, when I wanted to consecrate a powerful energy form called the Dhyana Linga, a unique structure in which all 7 chakra or energy centers are operating at their optimal capacity, I need to draw very fierce and intense discipline around me to assist with this project. Now that this mission is complete, I have altered my Vasana completely because the need for that kind of concentrated energy work is over. I draw other kind of people to me. I am probably unrecognizable to the people who knew me then because I am a different person. Depending on the nature of the work, I adjust the tone of my vasana. This may be puzzling to some, but this is the way every spiritual master operates. So, however, the capacity to adjust one's vasana is not an option reserved only for the spiritually adept. It is possible for each individual to choose not to be a victim of their vasana to a great extent. All it takes is a certain awareness. With a little awareness, every human being can begin to transform habit into choice, compulsion into consciousness. It is important to see that whatever seems determined in your life has been determined by you unconsciously. You have written your own software. Depending on the way you have written your software, that is the way you think, that is the way you feel, that is the way you act, and that is what you invite into your life. Depending on the kind of fragrance you emit, you attract life situations. Some people seem to constantly attract pleasant situations, others seem to constantly attract unpleasant ones. Or perhaps you see this in different phase in your life. In some phases, wonderful things seem to keep happening. In other, adverse circumstances keep recurring. Now this is simply depend on what you have in your karmic reservoir. Today you have rotten fish, so you attract some terrible situation. Tomorrow you have flowers, so you attract better situation. One thing that we are trying to change through yoga, and hopefully this book, is the kind of fragrance you throw out into the world. Many people talk freedom, but they secretly fear it. They feel secure in bondage. Other people opt for bondage because identification with an ideology, a religion, a relationship, or even a gadget enhances their identity in some way. Consider something as simple as your cell phone. If it is used to enhance activity, it can be source of empowerment. But if it is used to enhance identity, it becomes a source of bondage. In this way, people acquire vasana unconsciously, often believing they are choosing freedom when they are actually choosing enslavement. It happened some years ago when conducting a yoga program in southern India. I stayed in a village called Valliyudhamapalayam. My lodging was opposite a hill. I was told that Jain monks have lived and meditated in these hill caves more than 1900 years ago. This antiquity piqued my interest because it meant these monks have lived only a few centuries after the great Jain teacher and Guru Mahavira. One afternoon, I'd climb up with a few volunteers to a beautiful cave located like a bird perched in the rocks. The inside was filthy, strewn with bottles and graffiti. In India, every second rock and monument has the initials of tourists and visiting lovers scrawled upon it. These caves were no different. They were liberally scratched with the usual KPT loves SRM type of stuff. So we cleaned up the place. Now there were rough identification in the rock floor, which clearly served as beds for the monks. I sat down on one of these beds. I suddenly found my body beginning to pulsate powerfully. Intrigued, I decided to spend the night there. It was a night of revelation. I realized that the subtle body of the monk who had been there centuries ago was still incredibly alive. I could tell, for instance, that he had no left leg. It had been amputated just below the knee. Now these monks led quiet, isolated lives and have done nothing of consequence in the outside world. But they had left behind such a profound imprint that I could tell everything about their lives and their spiritual practices. The great rulers of those times are more or less forgotten. The richest folk and the most learned men and women of those times are erased from our memory. But these simple monks are as alive today as they were 1900 years ago. Their stories are available to those who are receptive, and they are capable of inspiring us to this very day. This is the nature of right kind of inner energy work. It is imperishable. Every individual energy carries a certain fragrance. The physical body falls back to the earth. However, the residue of each one of our thoughts, action, and above all our energy lingers on. This imprint can last for millennia after our time. The more conscious the energy work, the more enduring it is. So it is up to us to decide the nature of our bequest to the planet. This is what the anonymous Jain monk of Velayudhamapalayam did. Aware that every action has a consequence, they choose to live consciously. As a result, they achieve a certain kind of immortality that the rich and powerful in the history of the world have seldom managed to attain. So let's talk about sadhana related to these topics. A simple way to become aware of your vasana is to try to stay away for a length of time from that which you like, long for, love, consider to be the most precious. The intensity of the pangs you go through when you stay away tells you something about the nature and depth of your vasana. Now that you have identified your vasana, you can start working on transformation. If you think your entanglement is related to food, wait a few moments before you have a meal. If you are eagerly awaiting the arrival of loved one, consciously wait a few moments longer before you meet them. Depending on how deeply entangled you think you are, wait consciously for a few more moments before you engage in that activity or interaction. You will see that your experience of food or love or life generally become that much more profound gradually. The 2 minutes of waiting for a meal could be extended for 2 hours or for an entire day. This deceptively simple exercise can mark the beginning of a tremendous inner shift. Consciousness is not a matter of behavior, it is the nature of existence. Compulsiveness, however, is behavioral. The moment you wait before you engage in a compulsion, you are aligning yourself with the conscious nature of existence. Over time, this helps weaken the compulsive nature of your behavior. So, all that is from this topic. So, I hope you enjoy it, love it, and gain some perspective, some knowledge out of it. So, namaskaram.